For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon. I'm at the South African Institute of International Affairs to speak with Tom Wheeler on South Africa's foreign policy. Welcome, Tom.
My pleasure.
You mentioned that South Africa has lost some of its moral high ground that it acquired in 1994 with its peaceful transition. What are you referring to?
Well, I think that start of that came with the time when Nelson Mandela tried to convince the president of Nigeria, Sani Abacha, not to execute a man by the name of Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was an activist. And he went ahead anyway. And then Mandela went to the Commonwealth in Auckland, New Zealand, and convinced them to exclude Nigeria from the Commonwealth. And that was not well received in Africa because Mandela had broken ranks with Africa, broken the facade of African unity. And from then on, there was a tendency to move towards a more African agenda rather than the constitutional issues, the human rights issues that were in our constitution. And you also saw examples of this in the Security Council in 2007, when South Africa, on a very obscure legal point, voted against a human rights resolution on Myanmar, voted with China and Russia. Something that I think was quite unnecessary, because with China and Russia voting against it, it was not going to succeed anyway. And South Africa, in that way, drew a lot of criticism to itself. So, the sort of moral high ground of the early years of the period after '94 gave way to pragmatism, if you like, rather than to high moral principles.
South Africa is developing a reputation for pushing conflicting parties into coalition governments. What motivates this policy, and do you think it is the correct approach?
Well, that also goes back to '94, when the solution in South Africa was by a negotiated settlement and initially also a multi-party government. It only lasted for 2 years until de Klerk pulled out of it. But nevertheless, that model has been followed by the South African government pretty much ever since, and Mbeki went around Africa trying to apply it in the DRC, in Côte d'Ivoire, and so on. So it comes from that era that but unfortunately one model doesn't suit all, as we've now seen in Côte d'Ivoire. It's not working, and the government has done a turnabout in the last few days, recognizing that that's not the way to go, that you've got to accept the outcome of the election and not try and force people together who don't want to be together.
Around recent crises, such as in Côte d'Ivoire and Libya, South Africa has been accused of ambiguity in its response. Do you think this is a fair criticism? How could South Africa be clearer in its approach to the crises in Libya and Côte d'Ivoire?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the previous point, that there was this attempt to act as the conciliator, to bring people together who didn't want to be together, who had no intention of cooperating with each other. So the approach is you try and get them around a table to negotiate, but they have no intention of doing so. And it's meant that the South African government has had to do a couple of somersaults in the last little while, changing its position, simply to accept the reality that the African Union also didn't support this approach, and President Zuma didn't get any support in Addis Ababa the other day for his idea. So it's created this sense that South Africa is jumping all over the place, which is not so good for the sense of consistency.
You have recently published a book on South Africa's foreign policy over the last few decades. What are the salient features of South Africa's foreign policy over this period that you believe to be most worthy of discussion?
Now, I must tell you that this is not an academic study, research. It's the memoirs of people who served in the South African Foreign Service between 1966 and 1995. And so it follows the multiple threads of that relationship. For instance, there's a very good chapter on the negotiation of a peace settlement between Angola, South Africa, and the Cubans, seen from the perspective of a number of the players, Pik Botha as the foreign minister, Neil van Heerden as the Director General of Foreign Affairs, and then Karl van Hirschberg, who was in the Administrator General's office in Namibia, and various other members of the department. So but to answer your question more specifically, what comes out of this book, which I have in my hand here, is that the South African Foreign Service was almost caught in a bind between, on the left, all the anti-apartheid forces abroad, whether they were governments, the United Nations, activist organizations in various countries, the ANC and the various liberation movements on the one side, and on the other side you had the security forces, the military, with their total onslaught ideology. They believed that South Africa was threatened by the Soviet Union, and they were prepared to do anything to counter that. And the Foreign Service, rather than the foreign policy, the Foreign Service, people like myself, were caught in this situation where you had to try and keep the conversation going internationally with other governments, so that when the solution came, as it did in '94, that we were not totally isolated, something like North Korea, that the doors were open, we were in conversation with our counterparts in a host of countries. By the time '94 came, we had embassies in almost all the countries of the world, because of that 1990 to '94 gap. And the other thing that I think this proves is there have been comments by various people that South Africa didn't have a professional foreign service, that we were just sanctions busting and trying to sell apartheid. It's not true. And this book, or these actually 3 books, will show the quality of the South African Foreign Service, which still remains to some extent in Durko today. Those people, the younger members of the Foreign Service, are still there and still making a very useful input based on the experience that they've built up over many years. I think it's a fascinating story. I call it a kaleidoscope. There are many different stories which all fit together to make this whole picture of what it was like to be a South African diplomat during those years.
Donate now and give 15 Rand a month. SMS JOIN to 41486.